The distant wail of a hungry baby shattered the stillness of the prairie night, a sound that clawed at Nora Vance's heart as she frantically searched through her meager supplies for the 10th time that hour. Her hands trembled as they moved from one empty container to another, desperately hoping to find even a drop of milk she might have overlooked. There was nothing left, and her baby boy's cries grew more insistent, more desperate. "Hush now, William," she whispered, tears streaming down her face as she cradled her 3-month-old son against her chest. "Mama's trying. I'm trying so hard." Spring of 1876 had brought nothing but hardship to the young widow. After losing her husband Thomas to pneumonia just weeks before William's birth, Nora had been forced to leave their failing homestead in Kansas. With nothing but a wagon, one aging horse, and whatever possessions she could pack, she had set out for Colorado where her cousin had settled years before. But the journey had taken longer than expected, her supplies dwindling faster than anticipated, and now she found herself stranded on the vast plains with a hungry baby and no means to feed him. Her own body had failed them both. The stress and poor nutrition of the journey had dried up her milk 2 days ago, and the cow's milk she'd purchased at the last trading post was gone. William's pitiful cries cut through her like knives as she paced the small camp she'd made near a creek bed. "Please, God," she prayed, rocking her son desperately. "Send us help." As if in answer, the sound of hoofbeats approached from the distance. Nora froze, her heart hammering in her chest. Alone in the wilderness with a baby, she was vulnerable to all manner of dangers. She quickly placed William in the wagon and reached for the small pistol Thomas had insisted she learn to use. The rider appeared over the rise, silhouetted against the setting sun. He was tall in the saddle, broad-shouldered, with a hat pulled low over his eyes. As he drew closer, Nora could make out a strong-jawed face weathered by sun and wind. He pulled his horse to a stop a respectful distance from her camp. "Evening, madam," he called, his voice deep but gentle. "Noticed your fire from across the way. Everything all right?" Before Nora could answer, William let out another desperate cry. The man's eyes darted to the wagon, then back to Nora's tear-stained face. "My baby," she said, her voice breaking. "He's hungry, and I've no milk left. Nothing to feed him." The stranger dismounted in one fluid motion, keeping his movements slow and unthreatening. As he stepped into the light of her small fire, Nora could see he was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 30, with kind eyes that crinkled at the corners. A leather vest hung open over a faded blue shirt, and a worn holster sat at his hip, though his hand was nowhere near it. "Name's Grant Northcott, madam. Ranch about 5 miles east of here." He glanced toward the wagon where William continued to cry. "How long's he been without?" "Since this morning," Nora admitted, lowering the pistol slightly but not putting it away. "I'm Nora Vance. My boy is William." Grant's expression softened. "May I?" he asked, gesturing toward the wagon. After a moment's hesitation, Nora nodded, following closely as he approached. Grant peered at the red-faced infant, his features contorting with concern as William's tiny fists waved in the air. "From today he'll never go without," Grant said firmly, turning to face Nora. "My ranch isn't far. We've got milk cows, plenty to spare. I can take you there tonight." Nora hesitated, weighing her options. The stranger seemed genuine, but she'd heard tales of bandits and worse who preyed on vulnerable travelers. As if reading her thoughts, Grant stepped back, giving her space. "I understand your caution, Mrs. Vance, but that little one needs help, and soon. I give you my word as a man of honor that you'll be safe at my ranch. My housekeeper, Mrs. Wilkins, is there. She raised 5 children of her own and would be mighty displeased with me if I left a hungry baby out here in the wilderness." William's cries grew more frantic, and Nora felt her resolve crumbling. What choice did she have? Her baby needed milk, and this man was offering it. "Very well, Mr. Northcott," she said finally. "We'll come with you." Relief washed over Grant's face. "Good decision. Let me help you pack up. We'll hitch your wagon to my horse. He's strong enough to pull it, and we'll make better time." Within 20 minutes, they were on their way, Grant riding alongside the wagon as Nora held William, trying to soothe him with whispered promises of food soon to come. The night had fully descended now, but a full moon illuminated their path. "What brings you out this way alone, Mrs. Vance?" Grant asked, breaking the silence that had settled between them. My husband died this past winter, Nora replied, her voice hollow with the still fresh grief. I'm heading to Boulder to stay with my cousin Jane. Grant nodded solemnly. I'm sorry for your loss. It's a hard country for a woman alone. I'm discovering that, Nora said with a weak attempt at a smile. Thomas and I came west from Pennsylvania 5 years ago. He had dreams of building a cattle empire. Instead, we barely scraped by on our homestead. And then, she trailed off, not wanting to relive those final terrible days. And then he was gone, Grant finished gently, leaving you to pick up the pieces. Yes, Nora whispered, surprised at how easily this stranger seemed to understand. They crested a small hill, and suddenly a cluster of lights appeared in the distance, warm and welcoming against the darkness of the plains. Northcott Ranch, Grant announced with quiet pride. Not much to look at compared to some, but it's mine. Built it from nothing these past 8 years. As they drew closer, Nora could make out a sturdy main house with a wide porch, several outbuildings, and corrals containing the shadowy forms of cattle and horses. A large barn stood to one side, and smoke curled from the chimney of the house, promising warmth within. A door opened as they approached, spilling golden lamplight onto the packed earth of the yard. A stout woman in her 50s emerged, wiping her hands on her apron. Grant Northcott, what on earth? You said you'd be back before supper, and here it's near 9 o'clock. Her scolding tone shifted abruptly when she spotted Nora and the baby. Oh my goodness, who have you brought us? Grant jumped down from his horse and quickly explained the situation as he helped Nora from the wagon. William had cried himself into exhaustion, but still whimpered weakly in her arms. You poor dears, Mrs. Wilkins said, ushering Nora toward the house. Come in, come in. Grant, go fetch some fresh milk from the spring house. I'll warm it for the little one. The interior of the ranch house was simple but comfortable, with solid wooden furniture and colorful rag rugs covering the plank floors. A fire blazed in the stone hearth, and kerosene lamps cast a warm glow over the main room. Sit here by the fire, Mrs. Wilkins instructed, pulling a rocking chair closer to the warmth. Grant will have that milk in a jiffy. I'm Eliza Wilkins, by the way. I've kept house for this boy since he first put down roots here, though he's hardly a boy anymore. True to her word, Grant returned moments later with a pitcher of milk. Mrs. Wilkins took it to the kitchen and soon returned with a small cup and a clean cloth. Now then, she said, showing the items to Nora. We'll dip the cloth in the milk and let the baby suck on it. It's not as good as a proper bottle, but it'll do until morning when we can send one of the hands to town for proper supplies. Nora watched anxiously as Mrs. Wilkins demonstrated, then took over herself, carefully letting William suck the milk from the cloth. His desperate cries ceased immediately as he tasted the milk, his tiny body relaxing in relief. There now, Grant said softly, watching from nearby. Told you he wouldn't go without any more. Tears of gratitude filled Nora's eyes as she looked up at the tall cowboy. Thank you, Mr. Northcott. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't come along. Just Grant, please. And think nothing of it. No decent man could ride past a mother and child in need. His smile was warm, genuine, and something about it made Nora's heart beat a little faster despite her exhaustion. Mrs. Wilkins prepared a simple but hearty meal of beans, cornbread, and cold roast beef, which Nora ate one-handed while continuing to feed William. The food was the best she'd tasted in weeks, and she found herself ravenous. You'll stay the night, of course, Grant said, as if it were already decided. Tomorrow we can figure out your next steps. Boulder's still a good 4 days' journey from here. Too tired to argue, Nora simply nodded her thanks. After the meal, Mrs. Wilkins showed her to a small but clean bedroom off the main hall. This was my daughter's room before she married and moved to Denver, the housekeeper explained. There's fresh water in the pitcher, and I've laid out a nightgown that should fit you well enough. Grant's sending one of the hands to fetch a proper cradle from the attic for the little one. Left alone with William, who was now contentedly sleeping with a full belly for the first time in too many hours, Nora sank onto the edge of the bed. She was a stranger here, accepting charity from people she'd just met, and yet somehow it didn't feel wrong or dangerous. There was something about Grant Northcott, a steadiness and integrity that radiated from him, that made her feel safe in a way she hadn't since Thomas died. We're going to be all right, William, she whispered to her sleeping son. For tonight at least, we're going to be all right. The next morning, Nora woke to sunlight streaming through gingham curtains and the distant sounds of ranch life already in full swing. William was still sleeping peacefully in the cradle that had appeared sometime during the night, a beautifully crafted piece of furniture that spoke of care and craftsmanship. She dressed quickly in her travel-worn clothes, washed her face, and arranged her dark blonde hair as neatly as possible before picking up William and venturing out to find her hosts. The kitchen was warm and fragrant with the smell of coffee and frying bacon. Mrs. Wilkins stood at the stove, while Grant sat at the table reading what appeared to be a ledger. "Good morning," Nora said hesitantly from the doorway. Both heads turned, and Grant immediately stood, a smile breaking across his face. "Mrs. Vance, hope you slept well." "Better than I have in months," Nora admitted. "And please, call me Nora." Sit down," Mrs. Wilkins urged, bustling over to peer at William. "And how's our little man this morning?" "Looking much better, I'd say." Indeed, William's cheeks had lost their pinched look, and his eyes were bright and alert as he gazed around the unfamiliar room. "I sent Pete into town first thing," Grant said as Nora took a seat at the table. "He should be back by midday with proper baby bottles and whatever else Mrs. Wilkins thought you might need." "That's very kind, but I can't impose further," Nora began, but Grant waved away her protest. "It's no imposition. Pete needed to go anyway for supplies." He hesitated, then added, "I've been thinking about your situation, Nora. The trail to Boulder isn't easy, especially with a young baby. Spring storms can come up without warning. I'd like to offer you a place here until the weather's more settled and William's a bit stronger." Nora blinked in surprise. "I couldn't possibly. It makes good sense," Mrs. Wilkins interjected, placing a plate of eggs and bacon in front of Nora. "We've plenty of room, and I'd welcome the company. Most days it's just me and this workaholic who barely comes in for meals." Grant's cheeks colored slightly. "What Mrs. Wilkins means to say is that you'd be doing us a favor by staying. The house could use a woman's touch beyond what our housekeeper provides, and we've milk aplenty for the baby." Nora looked between them, overwhelmed by the unexpected kindness. "I don't know what to say. My cousin is expecting me." "We could send word," Grant suggested. "The stage goes through Boulder twice a month. Explain that you'll come when the weather's more settled." The offer was tempting. The prospect of continuing her journey alone, facing whatever hardships lay ahead on the trail, had been weighing heavily on Nora's mind. And there was something about this place, about these people, that felt right in a way she couldn't explain. "Perhaps just for a week or two," she conceded finally, "until I'm better prepared for the journey." Grant's smile was like sunrise breaking over the plains. "Excellent decision. We'll make sure you and William have everything you need." As promised, Pete returned from town by early afternoon, his saddlebags laden with baby bottles, clean cloths for diapers, and even a small stuffed bear for William. There was also a packet of letters, which Grant sorted through with casual interest until he came to one that made him pause. "Trouble?" Mrs. Wilkins asked, noticing his expression change. Grant folded the letter and tucked it into his pocket. "Nothing to worry about. Just business." But something in his tone made Nora wonder if there was more to it than he was letting on. The days that followed fell into a comfortable rhythm. Nora helped Mrs. Wilkins with household tasks, grateful to be useful after months of struggling alone. William thrived on the regular feedings of fresh cow's milk, growing stronger each day. And gradually, Nora found herself unwinding, the constant tension she'd carried since Thomas's death easing in the safety and routine of Northcott Ranch. Grant himself was often busy with ranch work, riding out early and returning late, but he always made time to check on Nora and William, his interest in the baby's progress seeming genuine and warm. Sometimes he would sit with them on the porch in the evenings, telling stories of his early days in Colorado Territory, of building the ranch from nothing but dreams and determination. "My father was a banker in St. Louis," he explained one evening as they watched the sunset paint the distant mountains in shades of gold and purple. "Expected me to follow in his footsteps. But I couldn't see spending my life indoors counting other people's money. So you came west," Nora said, understanding perfectly. It was what had driven Thomas too, that yearning for open spaces and the freedom to build something of one's own. Grant nodded. his profile strong against the fading light. Worked as a cowhand for 5 years, saved every penny. Bought this land when nobody else wanted it. Too far from town, they said. Too close to Indian territory. He smiled faintly. Turns out it was perfect land for cattle, with good water and sheltered valleys for winter grazing. You've built something wonderful here, Nora said sincerely. Grant turned to look at her directly, his eyes serious. Thank you. It means something, hearing that from someone who understands what it takes. Their gazes held for a moment longer than necessary, and Nora felt a flutter of something she hadn't experienced in a very long time. Quickly, she looked down at William, sleeping in her arms. I should put him to bed, she murmured, rising from her chair. Of course, Grant said, standing as well. Good night, Nora. Sleep well. As she settled William in his cradle that night, Nora found herself thinking about Grant Northcott in ways that both confused and alarmed her. Thomas had been gone less than 6 months. It seemed disloyal somehow to notice another man's kind eyes, or the way his smile transformed his face from handsome to breathtaking. What would your father think, William? She whispered to her sleeping son. He'd want us to be happy, wouldn't he? To be safe. But safety and happiness were complicated matters, especially for a widow with a young child and no resources of her own. Her plan had always been to reach her cousin in Boulder, to perhaps find work as a seamstress or shop assistant while Jane helped with William. The idea of staying at Northcott Ranch indefinitely, of becoming dependent on Grant's charity, made her uncomfortable despite the growing attraction she felt toward him. The next morning, Nora was hanging laundry in the yard when she overheard voices from the barn. Grant and his foreman, a grizzled older man named Hank. They're pushing west, boss, Hank was saying, his tone urgent. 3 more homesteads burned out last week. The Parkers lost everything, barely got out with their lives. Damn Kelson and his men, Grant replied, his voice hard with anger. The law won't touch him because he's got Judge Wilson in his pocket, but this has gone far enough. What are you planning to do? There was a pause before Grant answered. Call a meeting. All the small ranchers and homesteaders who've been targeted. It's time we stood together instead of letting Kelson pick us off one by one. Nora moved away, not wanting to eavesdrop further, but her mind was racing. Clearly, Grant was facing some kind of threat from this Kelson person. Was that what the letter had been about? She remembered the grim expression on his face when he'd read it. That evening at supper, Grant seemed preoccupied, responding to conversation with distracted nods and brief answers. Finally, Mrs. Wilkins put down her fork with an exasperated sigh. For heaven's sake, Grant, just tell us what's troubling you. We're not blind, you know. Grant looked up, startled, then gave a rueful smile. I'm that obvious, am I? Like a thundercloud on a clear day, the housekeeper confirmed. With a sigh, Grant pushed his plate away. I've been trying not to worry you ladies, but I suppose you should know. There's a big cattle outfit to the north, Rocking K Ranch, owned by a man named Victor Kelson. He came out from Chicago about 3 years ago with Eastern money behind him and started buying up land. When people wouldn't sell, accidents started happening. What kind of accidents? Nora asked quietly. Fires. Cattle stampeded through crops. Water sources mysteriously polluted. Grant's jaw tightened. Last month, a homesteader named Jim Fisher was found shot in the back while checking his fences. No witnesses, of course. Mrs. Wilkins made a distressed sound. And now they're moving this way? Grant nodded grimly. Kelson wants a clear run to the river for his cattle. My land stands in his way, along with a few others. He's offered to buy me out 3 times, each offer lower than the last. Says he's doing me a favor because eventually I'll have nothing left to sell. That's terrible, Nora exclaimed. Can't the authorities do something? The county sheriff is 70 years old and has 2 deputies for an area the size of Rhode Island, Grant said with a bitter laugh. And as I mentioned to Hank, Judge Wilson, who presides over the territorial court, plays poker with Kelson every Saturday night. So what will you do? Mrs. Wilkins asked, concern etched on her kind face. Fight, if it comes to that, Grant replied simply. But first, try to organize the other small ranchers. There's strength in numbers. He looked at Nora apologetically. I'm sorry to bring this trouble to your door. Perhaps it would be best if you continued to your cousins sooner rather than later. The thought of leaving now, when Grant was facing such danger, made Nora's heart clench. I'm not afraid, she said firmly. Thomas and I faced our share of hardships. I know what it means to stand your ground. Grant's expression softened as he looked at her. You're a remarkable woman, Nora Vance. She certainly is, Mrs. Wilkins agreed, her shrewd eyes moving between them. And she's right. Running never solved anything. Later that night, unable to sleep, Nora slipped from her room and made her way to the kitchen for a glass of water. She was surprised to find Grant there, sitting at the table with a glass of whiskey and the troubling letter spread out before him. Oh, she said, startled. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to intrude. Grant looked up, his expression clearing at the sight of her. No intrusion. I couldn't sleep. Nor could I, Nora admitted, filling a glass from the water pitcher. After a moment's hesitation, she sat across from him. Is that from Kelson? Grant nodded, pushing the letter toward her. See for yourself. The handwriting was elegant, the paper expensive, but the message was brutally clear. Sell now or face the consequences. The final line chilled Nora's blood. Remember Fisher. How unfortunate for his widow and children. He's threatening you, she said, pushing the letter back, her hand trembling slightly. He's threatening everyone who stands in his way, Grant corrected. But yes, this time it's personal. What will you do? Grant took a sip of his whiskey, his eyes distant. What I've always done. Work the land, tend my cattle, build something worth having. His gaze returned to her, intense and direct. I didn't fight my way out here, build this place from nothing, just to hand it over to some Chicago dandy with blood money. Nora nodded, understanding completely. It was the same spirit that had brought her and Thomas West that determination to make something of oneself, to build a life on one's own terms. I admire your courage, she said softly. Grant's hand moved across the table, not quite touching hers, but close enough that she could feel the warmth of it. And I admire yours, Nora. To set out alone with a baby, facing all the dangers of the trail. That takes real bravery. Or desperation, she replied with a faint smile. Sometimes they're the same thing. His eyes held hers, and in that moment, something shifted between them, a recognition of kindred spirits facing an uncertain world with nothing but their own strength and determination. The moment was broken by William's cry from the bedroom. Nora rose quickly. I should go to him. Grant stood as well. Of course. Good night, Nora. Good night, Grant, she replied, and as she returned to her room to tend to her son, she realized it was the first time she'd used his given name aloud. The next day brought a flurry of activity to the ranch. Riders came and went, grim-faced men who nodded respectfully to Nora but saved their words for Grant. They gathered in the barn, voices low but intense, and emerged with determined expressions. What's happening? Nora asked Mrs. Wilkins as they prepared dinner for what promised to be a full table. Grant's organizing, the housekeeper replied, chopping carrots with vigorous strokes. Getting the neighbors to band together. Safety in numbers, as they say. By evening, the ranch house was filled with nearly 20 people, ranchers and their wives, a few homesteaders, even the town's doctor who owned a small plot of land Kelson coveted. They crowded around the dining table, spilled into the sitting room, plates balanced on knees as they ate and discussed strategy. Nora moved among them, refilling coffee cups and listening to the talk. These were good people, hardworking and honest, united by their determination to keep what they'd built with their own hands. He's got at least 15 gunmen, a weather-beaten rancher named Potter was saying. Brought them up from Texas, mean as snakes and twice as deadly. Numbers aren't everything, Grant replied. We know this land better than they do. And we're fighting for our homes, not for pay. Still, might be good to have some extra guns, suggested another man. My brother-in-law was a lawman in Kansas. I could write to him. The discussion continued, plans forming and reforming as each person contributed their thoughts. Throughout it all, Grant remained calm and focused, a natural leader whom the others clearly respected. As the meeting broke up, with agreements to meet again in 3 days' time, Nora found herself standing beside Grant on the porch, watching the last of the visitors ride away into the gathering dusk. Do you think it will work? She asked quietly. This alliance. Grant sighed, running a hand through his hair. It has to. Alone, none of us stand a chance against Kelson's resources. Together, we might just hold out long enough for the territorial governor to take notice. He's an honest man, By all accounts. Nora nodded, then said what had been on her mind all day. I want to help. Grant turned to look at her, surprise evident in his expression. Nora, you have William to think of, and I am thinking of him, she interrupted. Of the kind of world I want him to grow up in. One where men like Kelson don't get to take whatever they want through violence and intimidation. She met his gaze steadily. I'm not afraid, Grant, and I'm stronger than I look. For a long moment, he studied her face, as if seeing her truly for the first time. Then, slowly, he nodded. I believe you are at that. All right then, we can use all the help we can get. The next few days were tense, but productive. The alliance of small landowners organized patrols, ensuring that no ranch or homestead was left unguarded. They pooled resources for ammunition and supplies, and even sent a rider to Denver with a detailed letter for the territorial governor, outlining Kelson's intimidation tactics and the local authorities' failure to act. Nora found herself fully immersed in ranch life, helping Mrs. Wilkins prepare meals for the men who came and went at all hours, tending to William, who continued to thrive, and even learning to shoot more accurately with the small pistol Thomas had given her. Grant proved to be a patient teacher, standing behind her to adjust her stance, his hands steady on her arms as he showed her how to aim and squeeze the trigger gently. You're a natural, he commented after she hit the tin can they'd set up as a target 3 times in a row. Steady hands. Years of fine needlework, Nora replied with a small smile. Though I never thought I'd be using those skills for shooting. Grant's expression grew serious. I hope you never have to use this for anything more than target practice. But in this country, it's a necessary skill. As they walked back to the house, Grant's hand brushed against hers, a brief touch that sent warmth coursing through her. More and more, Nora found herself drawn to this strong, quiet man who had taken her and William in without hesitation, who fought not just for himself, but for an entire community, and who looked at her sometimes with an expression that made her heart race. The peaceful routine of the ranch was shattered 3 days later when one of Grant's cowboys rode in at full gallop, his horse lathered and heaving. Boss, he shouted, sliding from the saddle. Kelson's men are at the north pasture. They're driving off the cattle. Grant was already moving, calling orders to the other hands. Saddle my horse. Hank, get Potter and Johnson. Tell them to meet us there. He turned to Nora, who stood frozen on the porch. Stay here. Keep the doors locked. If there's trouble, I know what to do, she assured him, though her heart was pounding with fear not for herself, but for him. Grant hesitated. Then in a move that surprised them both, he stepped forward and kissed her swiftly on the forehead. I'll be back soon, he promised, then was gone, swinging up onto his horse and galloping away with 5 of his men. The hours that followed were some of the longest of Nora's life. She paced the house, William clutched to her chest, while Mrs. Wilkins kept watch from the upstairs window with a shotgun across her lap. They'll be all right, the older woman said, though her eyes never left the horizon. Grant knows what he's doing. It was nearly sunset when they heard horses approaching. Mrs. Wilkins peered out, then gave a cry of relief. It's them. They're back. Nora rushed outside, William still in her arms, to see Grant and his men riding slowly into the yard. There were fewer cattle than had left that morning, and several of the men bore cuts and bruises. Grant himself had a bloodied bandage wrapped around his upper arm. What happened? Nora asked as he dismounted stiffly. Ambush, Grant replied grimly. Kelson's men were waiting in the ravine. We managed to drive them off, but they got away with about 20 head. His eyes were hard with anger, and they shot Ben Parker when he tried to follow them. Is he? Nora couldn't finish the question. He'll live. Doc Jenkins is with him now. Grant winced as he adjusted the bandage on his arm. It's just a graze, but it stings like the devil. Come inside, Nora urged. Let me tend to it properly. In the kitchen, she gently removed the hasty bandage while Mrs. Wilkins prepared hot water and clean cloths. The wound was indeed just a graze, but it was deep enough to need proper cleaning and bandaging. You're good at this, Grant commented as Nora worked, her touch gentle but efficient. I've had practice, she replied softly. Thomas was always getting himself cut or bruised on the homestead. The memory brought a pang of grief, but it was less sharp than before, as if the wound of his loss was finally beginning to heal. Tell me about him, Grant said quietly, if you don't mind. Nora's hands paused momentarily, then continued their work. He was a dreamer, always seeing possibilities where others saw only obstacles. When we came west, he was certain we'd build a cattle empire to rival any in Texas. She smiled faintly at the memory. Reality proved more challenging, but he never lost that optimism, that belief that tomorrow would be better. He sounds like a good man, Grant said sincerely. He was. Nora finished bandaging his arm and stepped back. And he would have liked you, I think. You're both builders, creators, men who make things grow where nothing grew before. Their eyes met and held, something unspoken passing between them. Then William squirmed in his cradle nearby, breaking the moment. I should feed him, Nora said, moving away. Of course. Grant stood, flexing his arm experimentally. Thank you for this. You have a gentle touch. That night, after William was asleep and Mrs. Wilkins had retired to her room, Nora found Grant on the porch, staring out into the darkness. You should be resting, she admonished gently, wrapping her shawl tighter around her shoulders against the cool night air. Too much on my mind, he replied, shifting to make room for her on the bench. Kelson's getting bolder. Today was just the beginning. What will you do? Grant was silent for a long moment. What I have to, he said finally. Fight for what's mine. But I'm worried about you and William. Perhaps it would be best if you continued to your cousins after all. The thought of leaving now, when danger was closing in, made Nora's heart contract painfully. No, she said firmly. I'm staying. Grant turned to look at her, his expression a mixture of surprise and something else, something warmer. Nora, it's not safe here. It's not safe anywhere, she countered. Not for a woman alone. At least here. She hesitated, then pressed on. At least here, I know where I stand. With people I've come to care for. Grant's hand found hers in the darkness, his fingers warm and strong as they closed around her smaller ones. I've come to care for you too, he said softly. More than I should, perhaps. Nora's heart raced at his words, at the touch of his hand on hers. I don't think there's a should when it comes to caring, Grant. He shifted closer, his face illuminated by the silver moonlight. When I found you on the trail that day, with William crying from hunger, something happened to me. Something I can't quite explain. All I knew was that I needed to help you. To make sure that baby never went hungry again. You've done that, and so much more. Nora whispered, acutely aware of his proximity, of the warmth of his body next to hers. I want to do more still, Grant said, his voice low and intense. I want to build something here, not just for myself, but for you and William too. If you'll stay. The words hung in the air between them, a question unasked but clear nonetheless. Nora found herself trembling, not from fear but from the enormity of what he was offering, what she was considering. Grant, a shot rang out in the darkness, the bullet splintering the wood of the porch railing inches from where they sat. Grant reacted instantly, pulling Nora to the floor and covering her body with his own as more shots followed. Into the house, he shouted, half dragging her through the door. Mrs. Wilkins, we're under attack. The housekeeper appeared at the top of the stairs, shotgun already in hand. Get to the back room, she called. I'll cover the upstairs windows. Nora ran to William's cradle, scooping up her startled, crying son and hurrying to the room Grant indicated, a small study with no windows, just solid walls and a heavy door. Stay here, Grant ordered, pressing his pistol into her hand. Don't come out until I call for you. Grant, Nora began, fear clenching her heart. I'll be fine, he assured her, his eyes meeting hers for one intense moment. Then he was gone, closing the door firmly behind him. The next half hour was a nightmare of gunfire and shouting, muffled by the thick walls of her hiding place. Nora clutched William to her chest, whispering soothing nonsense as he cried, all the while straining to hear what was happening outside. The pistol lay heavy in her lap, loaded and ready, though she prayed she wouldn't need to use it. Gradually, the gunfire slowed, then stopped altogether. Voices called to each other outside, familiar voices, Grant's men. Relief washed over her, only to be replaced by renewed fear when no one came to tell her it was safe to emerge. Finally, unable to bear the uncertainty any longer, Nora eased open the door, William held tight in one arm, the pistol in her free hand. The house was eerily quiet. She moved cautiously down the hallway toward the main room. The front door stood open, lantern lights spilling onto the porch where several men were gathered around someone on the ground. Nora's heart stuttered in her chest. "Grant," she called, her voice thin with fear. The men turned, and through the gap between them, she could see Grant kneeling beside a prone figure, pressing a cloth to the man's shoulder. Relief made her knees weak. "It's all right, Nora," Grant called, looking up. "They're gone. We drove them off." She stepped onto the porch, taking in the scene. The injured man was one of Kelson's hired guns, now a prisoner. Two of Grant's hands stood guard over him, while others moved about the yard, checking for damage. "Anyone hurt on our side?" she asked, scanning the faces anxiously. "Charlie took a bullet in the leg, but Doc's with him now," Grant replied, straightening up. "Says he'll be fine. We were lucky. They weren't expecting us to be ready for them." "How did you know?" Nora asked as Grant moved to her side, his eyes quickly checking her and William for any harm. "We've had men watching the approaches to the ranch since the cattle raid," he explained. "Saw them coming and had time to prepare an ambush of our own." His face hardened as he looked back at the wounded gunman. "One of Kelson's top men. He'll have some explaining to do when the sheriff gets here." Mrs. Wilkins appeared from inside the house, her shotgun still clutched in her capable hands. "Kitchen's ready for tending the wounded," she announced. "And I've put coffee on. Looks like none of us will be sleeping much tonight." The hours that followed were busy ones. The local doctor, already at the ranch tending to Charlie, saw to the prisoner's wound as well, while Grant and the other ranchers who had responded to the gunfire held a council of war in the main room. Nora moved between helping Mrs. Wilkins and listening to the men's discussion, William now sleeping peacefully despite the earlier commotion. "This changes everything," Potter was saying, his weathered face grim in the lamplight. "Attacking a man's home, at night, with women and children inside. That's not just business anymore. That's attempted murder. The question is, what do we do about it?" asked Johnson, a homesteader whose farm bordered Northcott Ranch to the east. "The sheriff will come, take statements, maybe even arrest this fellow, but Kelson will just deny everything and send more men." "Not if we take the fight to him first," Grant said quietly. The room fell silent as all eyes turned to him. "I'm not talking about gunning him down," he clarified. "I'm talking about a show of force. All of us, riding to the rocking K together, letting Kelson see exactly what he's up against." "You think that'll scare him off?" Potter sounded skeptical. "I think it might make him reconsider whether this land is worth the fight," Grant replied. "Especially if we bring the territorial marshal with us. I sent a rider to Denver yesterday with evidence of Kelson's tactics. With luck, the marshal will be here within the week." The discussion continued, plans made and refined, until finally the men dispersed to grab what sleep they could before dawn. Grant found Nora in the kitchen, washing the last of the coffee cups. "You should rest," he said gently. "It's been a long night." "So should you," she countered, drying her hands on a towel. "But I doubt either of us will sleep much." Grant sighed, leaning against the doorframe. "Probably not." He studied her face in the soft lamplight. "You're handling all this remarkably well, Nora. Most women would be hysterical after what happened tonight." "I'm not most women," she replied with a small smile. "And hysteria never solved anything." Grant's expression softened. "No, you certainly aren't most women." He hesitated, then added, "Before the shooting started, on the porch, I was trying to tell you something." Nora's heart quickened. "Yes, I remember. I meant it, Nora. About wanting you and William to stay. Not just for now, but permanently." He took a step toward her. "I know it's sudden. I know you're still grieving Thomas. But something happened when I found you on that trail. Something I've never felt before." Nora found it hard to breathe, hard to think with him standing so close, his eyes so earnest and warm. "Grant, you don't have to answer now," he said quickly. "I know there's so much happening, and it's hardly the right time for such talk. But I wanted you to know, in case." He trailed off, but the unspoken words hung between them. "In case something happens to me." Unable to bear the thought, Nora closed the distance between them and laid her hand against his cheek. "Nothing is going to happen to you," she said firmly. "Or to any of us. We're going to get through this, together." Grant covered her hand with his own, turning his face to press a kiss against her palm. The gesture, so tender and intimate, sent a shiver through her. "Together," he echoed, his voice a low promise that seemed to resonate through her very being. For a long moment, they stood there, connected by touch and gaze, and something deeper, something growing between them despite the danger and uncertainty surrounding them. Then, with visible reluctance, Grant stepped back. "Try to get some sleep," he said softly. "Tomorrow will be another long day." As Nora made her way back to her room, to William sleeping peacefully in his cradle, she found herself at a crossroads she had never expected to face. 6 months a widow, still carrying the weight of grief and loss, yet feeling the unmistakable stirrings of something new, something that both frightened and exhilarated her. Could she open her heart again so soon? Could she build a new life here, with this man who had saved her and her son from hunger and hardship? The question swirled in her mind as she lay sleepless, watching the first gray light of dawn filter through the curtains. No answers came, but deep in her heart, she knew what she wanted, what she was beginning to need. The next few days passed in a flurry of activity. Ranchers and homesteaders came and went, bringing news and coordinating defenses. The sheriff arrived, questioned the prisoner, and reluctantly agreed to hold him until the territorial marshal could arrive. But everyone knew the real reckoning was yet to come. Through it all, Nora found herself drawing closer to Grant. They worked side by side during the day, preparing the ranch for whatever might come, and in the evenings, they often sat together on the porch, talking quietly of their pasts, their dreams, the future they were beginning to imagine might be possible together. "I never thought I'd feel this way again," Nora admitted one evening, 5 days after the attack. William was asleep inside, and the first stars were appearing in the deepening blue of the sky. "After Thomas died, I was so certain that part of my life was over." Grant's hand found hers, fingers intertwining naturally, as if they had always been meant to fit together. And now, Nora turned to look at him, at the face that had become so dear to her in such a short time. "Now I'm certain it's just beginning." The joy that transformed Grant's expression was like sunrise breaking over the plains. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned in and kissed her. It was gentle at first, a question more than a demand, but when Nora responded, her hand coming up to touch his face, the kiss deepened into something more urgent, more certain. When they finally parted, both were breathless, and Grant rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that since the first time I saw you smile," he confessed. Nora laughed softly. "I was a mess that day, exhausted and terrified for my baby." "You were the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen," Grant corrected her. "A mother who would do anything for her child, who faced the wilderness alone rather than give up. How could I not fall in love with such courage?" The word love hung in the air between them, new and powerful and full of possibility. Nora felt it resonating within her, recognizing the truth of her own feelings at last. "I love you too," she whispered, the words both a revelation and a promise. "I think I have almost from the beginning." Grant kissed her again, and in that moment, all the danger and uncertainty surrounding them seemed distant and unimportant compared to the certainty they had found in each other's arms. The idyll was broken the next morning by the arrival of a rider from town, bringing news that changed everything. "Marshall's here," the young cowhand announced as he dismounted in the yard where Grant was checking the corral fence. "Brought 5 deputies with him, and there's more. Kelson's got wind of it. His men are clearing out of the rocking K, heading north fast." Grant straightened, his expression a mixture of relief and disbelief. "He's running." "Looks that way," the rider confirmed. "Marshall says to gather everyone at the town hall at noon. He wants statements from all the ranchers who've been targeted." The news spread quickly, and by mid-morning, the ranch was bustling with activity as everyone prepared to ride into town. Nora found Grant in the barn, saddling his horse. "Is it really over?" she asked, hardly daring to believe it could be so simple. Grant's smile was cautious but genuine. "Maybe. The territorial marshal carries a lot of weight. If Kelson's men are already running, it suggests they know they can't win a legal fight." "What about Kelson himself?" "That remains to be seen," Grant admitted. "But with his hired guns gone and the law on our side, his options are limited." The ride to town was tense, but hopeful. Nora traveled in the wagon with Mrs. Wilkins and William, while Grant and his men rode alongside, vigilant despite the promising news. The small settlement of Pine Creek consisted of a main street lined with wooden buildings, a church, and a few side streets of modest homes. The town hall, the largest building in the settlement, was already crowded when they arrived. The territorial marshal, a tall, imposing man with a silver star on his chest and a no-nonsense manner, called the meeting to order promptly at noon. He listened as one rancher after another recounted incidents of intimidation, sabotage, and violence, his expression growing grimmer with each testimony. When it was Grant's turn, he spoke clearly and factually about the cattle raid and the night attack on his ranch, finishing with, "We're not asking for special treatment, Marshal. Just the chance to work our land in peace, without fear of being burned out or shot in the back." The marshal nodded, his steely gaze sweeping the room. "What you've described is not just intimidation, but organized criminal activity. I've issued warrants for the arrest of Victor Kelson and his known associates on charges of theft, property destruction, and attempted murder." A murmur ran through the crowd, a mixture of surprise and satisfaction. However, the marshal continued, raising a hand for silence. "As some of you have already heard, Kelson and most of his men left the territory early this morning, heading north toward Wyoming. My deputies are in pursuit, but I want to be clear. This kind of threat doesn't disappear overnight. Some of Kelson's men may still be in the area. I'm leaving 2 deputies here in Pine Creek for the next month to help maintain order." The meeting continued with practical matters: how to report suspicious activity, the need for continued vigilance, plans for mutual defense. Throughout it all, Nora watched Grant, admiring the quiet authority with which he spoke, the respect he commanded from the other ranchers. This was a man who built things, who protected what he valued, who faced adversity with courage and determination. A man she could love not just with her heart, but with her mind and soul as well. As the gathering dispersed, the marshal approached Grant directly. "Northcott, I've heard your name before. You're building something solid out here. The territory needs men like you." Grant accepted the compliment with a nod. "Just trying to make a living, Marshal, like everyone else." "Well, you've stood your ground when others might have run. That counts for something in my book." The marshal glanced at Nora, who stood nearby with William in her arms. "Your family." Grant hesitated only a moment before placing his arm around Nora's shoulders. "Yes," he said simply. "My family." The word sent a warm glow through Nora's heart. Yes, they were becoming a family, she and Grant and William. A new beginning, unexpected but all the more precious for being found amidst hardship and danger. The journey back to the ranch was lighter somehow, the tension of the past days easing with each mile. The threat wasn't entirely gone, as the marshal had warned, but for the first time since the trouble had begun, there was real hope that it might soon be over. That evening, after William was asleep and Mrs. Wilkins had tactfully retired early, Grant and Nora sat together before the fire in the main room. Outside, a spring storm had blown in, rain pattering against the windows and wind sighing around the eaves of the house. But inside, all was warmth and comfort and growing certainty. "What happens now?" Nora asked, her head resting against Grant's shoulder, his arm around her waist. "Now we get back to living," he replied, pressing a kiss to her hair. "Building, growing, together." The question was both a hope and a fear, for while her heart was certain, the practicalities of their situation remained complex. Grant shifted slightly so he could see her face. "Together," he confirmed. "If that's what you want, Nora. I know it hasn't been long, and you've been through so much already. I don't want to rush you into anything you're not ready for." Nora reached up to touch his face, tracing the strong line of his jaw with gentle fingers. "When Thomas died, I thought my chance at happiness had died with him. All I could think about was survival, getting through each day for William's sake. But then you found us on that trail, and you said those words that changed everything. 'From today he'll never go without,'" Grant quoted softly. "Yes, and you kept that promise. Not just with milk for William, but with everything: safety, security, a home." Nora's eyes shone with unshed tears. "How could I not fall in love with a man like that?" Grant pulled her closer, his kiss tender yet passionate, a promise of all they could be together. When they finally parted, he rested his forehead against hers, his voice husky with emotion. "Marry me, Nora. Be my wife. Let me be a father to William. Let's build this life together, day by day, year by year. The words she had been both hoping for and fearing washed over her, and Nora found herself trembling with the magnitude of what they were contemplating. It hadn't even been 2 weeks since they'd met, yet it felt as if she had known Grant Northcott all her life. Yes, she whispered, the decision crystallizing in her heart with perfect clarity. Yes, I'll marry you. Joy transformed Grant's face, and he kissed her again, more deeply this time, sealing their promise to each other. Outside, the storm continued, but within the walls of Northcott Ranch, a new beginning was taking shape, born of hardship and hunger, but flowering into something beautiful and enduring. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the storm having passed in the night, leaving the world washed clean and sparkling in the spring sunshine. Nora woke early, a sense of peace and rightness filling her as she remembered the events of the previous evening, Grant's proposal, her acceptance, the future stretching before them full of promise. William was already awake in his cradle, cooing happily at the sunbeam that slanted through the window onto his blanket. Nora lifted him, marveling at how much he had grown in the short time they had been at the ranch, his cheeks now plump and rosy, his eyes bright with curiosity about the world around him. "We're home, little one," she whispered, pressing a kiss to his downy head. "We found our place." She dressed quickly, eager to begin this first day of their new life together. As she entered the kitchen, she found Mrs. Wilkins already at work, kneading bread dough with vigorous strokes. "Good morning," Nora said, settling William in the small wooden high chair Grant had fashioned for him. Mrs. Wilkins looked up, her shrewd eyes taking in Nora's glowing face. A slow smile spread across her own. Well, she said, dusting flour from her hands. "I see congratulations are in order." Nora felt herself blushing. "How did you know?" "My dear, I've known Grant Northcott since he was a green boy with nothing but dreams and determination. I've watched him build this ranch with his own hands, never once looking at a woman the way he looks at you." The housekeeper's smile softened. "And I've seen you come back to life these past days, like a flower turning toward the sun. It was only a matter of time." Grant himself appeared in the doorway then, his hair damp from washing, his smile widening at the sight of Nora. "Good morning," he said, crossing the room to kiss her cheek, a gesture both affectionate and respectful in the presence of Mrs. Wilkins. "Sleep well." "Better than I have in months," Nora admitted, returning his smile. "Good, because we have a busy day ahead of us." Grant poured himself a cup of coffee from the pot on the stove. "I've asked Pastor Miller to come out this afternoon. Thought we might not want to wait." Nora blinked in surprise. "Today? You want to marry today?" Grant set down his cup, suddenly uncertain. "If that's too soon, we can wait, of course. I just thought, with everything that's happened, why delay our happiness any longer?" The impulsiveness of it, so contrary to her usual careful nature, made Nora laugh with unexpected delight. "Why indeed," she agreed. "Today it is." Mrs. Wilkins clapped her hands together. "Well then, we have work to do. A wedding dinner to prepare, the house to clean, and most importantly, something suitable for the bride to wear." The day passed in a whirlwind of activity. Word spread quickly among the ranch hands and neighboring homesteaders, and by mid-afternoon, wagons began arriving, bringing families dressed in their Sunday best, carrying dishes for the wedding feast, and wearing expressions of genuine pleasure at this unexpected celebration. Nora found herself swept up in the preparations, laughing more than she had in months as Mrs. Wilkins and the other women fussed over her, helping her into the housekeeper's own wedding dress carefully preserved for 30 years and only slightly altered to fit Nora's slimmer frame. "Something borrowed, Mrs. Wilkins said with satisfaction, as she placed a delicate lace handkerchief in Nora's hand. "And something blue." She fastened a small brooch with a blue stone onto the high collar of the dress. "You've thought of everything," Nora said, touched by the older woman's thoughtfulness. "Not everything," replied a voice from the doorway. Nora turned to see Jane, her cousin from Boulder, standing there with a radiant smile. "Jane, how?" "Grant sent for me," Jane explained, crossing the room to embrace Nora. "A writer arrived yesterday with the most extraordinary letter, explaining everything and asking if I could possibly come for your wedding. How could I refuse?" She held Nora at arm's length, examining her with affectionate scrutiny. "You look wonderful, Nora. Happier than I've seen you since before Thomas fell ill." "I am happy," Nora admitted. "I know it seems sudden, love often is," Jane interrupted with a smile. "And from what I've seen of Grant Northcott in the past hour, he's a man worth loving. Thomas would approve, you know. He only ever wanted your happiness." Tears pricked at Nora's eyes at the mention of her first husband. "I know," she whispered. "I believe he would." A knock at the door announced that it was time. Pastor Miller, who had ridden out from Pine Creek, was ready to perform the ceremony in the main room of the ranch house, which had been hastily decorated with wildflowers and ribbons by the women of the neighboring homesteads. Grant waited for her by the fireplace, tall and handsome in a clean black suit, his usually tanned face a bit pale with nervousness. But when he saw Nora walking toward him, William in her arms, his expression transformed into one of such joy and wonder that it took her breath away. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. They exchanged vows before their friends and neighbors, promising to love and cherish each other through whatever life might bring. When Pastor Miller pronounced them husband and wife, Grant's kiss was gentle but filled with promise, and the cheer that went up from the assembled guests made William startle and then laugh, his tiny hands clapping as if he too celebrated this new beginning. The wedding feast that followed was the finest Pine Creek had seen in years. Tables had been set up in the yard, laden with dishes contributed by every family: roast beef and ham, chicken and dumplings, fresh bread and preserves, pies and cakes of every description. Lanterns were lit as evening fell, and someone produced a fiddle, leading to dancing that continued well into the night. Through it all, Nora moved in a haze of happiness, scarcely able to believe that this was her life now surrounded by friends, with William secure in the loving arms of Mrs. Wilkins or Jane, and Grant never far from her side, his eyes seeking hers across the crowded yard, his hand finding hers whenever they stood together. As the celebration finally began to wind down, guests departing with final congratulations and good wishes, Grant led Nora to a quiet corner of the porch, away from the remaining revelers. "Happy, Mrs. Northcott?" he asked softly, his arms encircling her waist. The new name sent a thrill through her. "Very," she assured him, leaning into his embrace. "Though I still can hardly believe it's real." "It's real," Grant confirmed, kissing her temple. "And it's just the beginning." He hesitated, then added, "I have something to show you." Taking her hand, he led her around the side of the house to a small stand of cottonwoods that Nora had noticed but never explored. As they drew closer, she could make out the shape of a small cabin nestled among the trees, its windows glowing with lamplight. "What is this?" she asked, curious. "Our home," Grant replied. "At least for now. I had the men working on it all week, getting it ready. I thought you and William might like a place of your own, a bit separate from the main house, just until we can build something bigger, closer to the creek where the view is better." Touched beyond words by his thoughtfulness, Nora followed him inside. The cabin was small but perfect: a main room with a stone fireplace, a bedroom just large enough for a double bed and William's cradle, and a tiny kitchen with a cast-iron stove. Someone Mrs. Wilkins, Nora suspected, had filled vases with wildflowers and laid a colorful quilt on the bed. "It's wonderful," Nora breathed, turning to face her new husband. "Perfect." Grant's smile was tender as he brushed a strand of hair from her face. "Not quite perfect yet," he murmured, drawing her into his arms. "But it will be, now that you're here." Their kiss deepened, passion building between them as the realization dawned that they were alone at last, husband and wife with all the night before them. When they finally parted, both were breathless, and Grant's eyes had darkened with desire. "William?" Nora asked, suddenly remembering her son. "With Jane in the main house," Grant assured her. "She offered to keep him tonight, said it would give her a chance to get to know her new nephew properly." Relieved and grateful for her cousin's understanding, Nora let herself be drawn into another embrace, surrendering to the feelings that had been building between them from almost the first moment they met. As Grant's lips found hers again, more urgent now, more demanding, she knew with absolute certainty that she had found her way home at last. The months that followed were the happiest of Nora's life. Spring gave way to summer, and the ranch thrived under Grant's careful management. The threat from Kelson and his men faded into memory as reports came that the land baron had established himself in Wyoming territory, apparently having decided that Colorado was no longer worth the fight. Jane returned to Boulder after a week's visit, but promised to come back in the fall, perhaps to stay permanently if Nora and Grant were agreeable. "I'm getting tired of town life," she confessed, "and there's nothing I love more than watching William grow." William himself flourished in the healthy environment of the ranch. By his first birthday in late August, he was crawling everywhere, pulling himself up on furniture, and showing every sign of walking soon. His first word was, "duh," directed at Grant with such obvious affection that Nora's eyes filled with tears of joy. "He thinks I'm his father," Grant said with wonder the first time it happened. "You are," Nora replied simply, "in every way that matters." Their own relationship deepened with each passing day. The passion between them was a constant source of joy and discovery, but even more precious was the partnership they formed, working side by side to build their life together. Grant taught Nora about ranching, and she brought her skills in household management and careful planning to complement his visionary nature. Together, they expanded the garden, added new cattle to the herd, and began planning the larger house Grant had promised to be built the following spring on the rise overlooking the creek. The small cabin remained their private haven, a place where they could be just husband and wife, away from the busy activity of the main ranch house. It was in this cabin, on a crisp October evening, that Nora shared the news she had been certain of for several weeks but had wanted to confirm before telling Grant. "I'm with child," she said simply, as they sat before the fire after putting William to bed. Grant's head jerked up, his eyes wide with surprise and then dawning joy. "Truly," Nora nodded, her hand resting instinctively on her still flat stomach. "Dr. Jenkins confirmed it yesterday when he was here checking on Mrs. Potter's rheumatism. The baby should come in late spring." In one fluid motion, Grant was on his knees before her chair, his hands covering hers, his face alight with wonder. "A baby," he breathed. "Our baby. Are you pleased?" Nora asked, though his expression left little doubt. "Pleased? Nora, I'm ecstatic." Grant laughed, pulling her into an embrace that lifted her from the chair. "A brother or sister for William, a child of our own making. How could I be anything but overjoyed?" As he held her, Nora reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. It had begun with hunger and desperation on a lonely trail, with her baby crying for milk she couldn't provide. And then Grant had appeared, like an answer to a prayer she hadn't even known how to form, with his promise that changed everything. From today he'll never go without. That promise had been kept 100-fold. William had never again known hunger or want. And Nora herself had been given so much more than she had ever dared to hope for: a home, a partner, a love that grew stronger with each passing day. "What are you thinking?" Grant asked, noticing her thoughtful expression as he set her gently back on her feet. "About beginnings," Nora replied, her arms still around his neck. "About how the darkest moments can lead to the brightest dawns." Grant's smile was tender as he brushed a kiss across her forehead. "Philosopher as well as beauty? I'm a fortunate man indeed." "We're both fortunate," Nora corrected him, leaning into his strength, his steadiness, his love. "To have found each other when we least expected it, to have this chance to build something lasting together." Outside, the wind picked up, rustling the leaves of the cottonwoods and carrying the first hint of winter's approach. But inside the small cabin, all was warmth and light and promise of family forged in adversity but flourishing in love, their future stretching before them as vast and hopeful as the Colorado sky. When spring came again to Northcott Ranch, it brought with it the completion of the new house on the rise, a sturdy 2-story structure with wide windows to catch the mountain views and a deep porch where Nora could sit and watch William play. And on a perfect May morning, with sunlight streaming through those windows and the scent of wildflowers drifting on the breeze, Nora gave birth to a daughter, Catherine Jane Northcott, named for both Grant's mother and Nora's cousin who had returned to live with them as promised. "She's perfect," Grant whispered, holding his newborn daughter with a tenderness that brought tears to Nora's eyes. "Just like her mother." William, now walking confidently and chattering in the half-formed sentences of a child just discovering language, peered curiously at his sister from the safety of Jane's lap. "Baby," he announced with satisfaction, reaching out a gentle finger to touch Catherine's tiny hand. "Your sister," Nora confirmed, her heart so full of love for these three people: her son, her daughter, her husband, that it seemed impossible it could be contained within her body. Grant sat carefully on the edge of the bed, cradling Catherine in one arm, while his other hand sought Nora's. "I never imagined such happiness was possible," he said softly. "That day on the trail, when I heard William crying, I was just trying to help a woman and child in need. I had no idea I was finding my future, my family, my heart. God works in mysterious ways." Jane commented from her place by the window, William now contentedly playing with wooden blocks at her feet. "He brought you together when you both needed each other most. And now we have everything we could ever want," Nora agreed, looking around at the sunlit room, at the sturdy walls of the home Grant had built for them, at the family they had created together. Grant's smile was tender as he leaned down to kiss her. "Everything and more," he murmured against her lips. "From this day forward, none of us will ever go without not food, not shelter, and certainly not love." And as Nora returned his kiss, her daughter secure in his arms and her son playing happily nearby, she knew with absolute certainty that Grant's promise had been kept in ways neither of them could have imagined on that fateful day when hunger and desperation had led to the greatest blessing of all, finding each other.